The Navy SEAL captain vanished into the Maine snow after saving a young FBI agent and her K-9 from a midnight ambush. Only a torn piece of his jacket remained on the frozen fence. But Rin would not leave the trail. Through the storm, the dog pulled Jessica toward an abandoned rail shed, where one weak breath still waited. If you believe God sends loyal hearts into the darkest winter, leave amen. Snow swallowed sound differently in the deep woods beyond Coldwater Junction. Back at the container yard, metal had screamed, engines had growled, and the old alarm had cried out like some wounded church bell in the storm. Here beneath the black pines, the world became softer and more frightening. Every branch wore a white sleeve. Every footstep vanished almost as soon as Jessica Ward made it. Her flashlight reached only a few yards before the storm folded the beam into gray dust, and somewhere behind her, the support team's voices faded behind trees, distance, and weather. Jessica did not run blindly into the woods. She forced herself to do what training demanded, even while her heart begged her to move faster. She sent her location through the emergency beacon, reported the direction Rin had taken, and told Maya Chen that she was following an active scent trail along the east drainage ditch toward the rail spur. Maya's reply came broken but clear enough. Support was coming, but slowly. The vehicles could not cross the ditch, and the foot team had to circle around the old freight line. Rin did not wait for perfect conditions. The 5-year-old sable German shepherd stood at the edge of the ditch with Caleb's torn field, cloth scent still alive in his nose. Snow gathered along his black muzzle and the tips of his ears, but his amber eyes remained fixed ahead. He breathed in layers, Caleb's jacket fabric, diesel and cold machine oil from the yard, the sharp ghost of industrial deodorizer from the North Star truck, wet rail grit, road salt, and something else. Jessica could not name, but Rin seemed to understand. A dog did not need a confession. A dog only needed the truth left behind in the air. "Find him," Jessica whispered. Rin moved. They followed the shallow drainage ditch north, where Caleb must have slipped away from the yard after giving Jessica and Rin those 3 impossible minutes. The ditch was half filled with snow and broken reeds, but now and then Jessica saw signs that kept hope breathing. A crushed patch beneath a pine limb, a smear of dark rail mud on white bark, the mark of a gloved hand against snow-packed stone. Caleb had not gone far. That made sense. He would not have chosen the road where the trucks could circle back. He would have chosen cover, low ground, and the rail spur, using the storm as both shield and enemy. Still, knowing the logic did not ease the ache in Jessica's chest. She heard Caleb's voice again and again, "Take Rin and run." It had been an order, and she had obeyed it. But the heart was not a report form. It did not accept clean reasoning when a man had stayed behind in the snow for you. Jessica's breath shook once. She steadied it. Guilt could come later. Right now, Caleb needed her alive, awake, and moving. A brittle crack snapped through the trees to her right, sudden as a bone. Dry branch breaking under an unseen hand. Rin stopped so fast the leash tightened. The flashlight trembled over empty pines, falling snow, and one black crow lifting from a branch with silent wings. Then nothing. Only the pause where fear waited to be named. Jessica lowered her voice. "Easy, boy." Rin did not look at the crow. He turned slowly in a half-circle, nose high, testing the wind. The trail had scattered. Snow gusted sideways now, coming from the west, dragging scents apart like loose threads. For almost a full minute, Rin stood motionless. Jessica watched him, praying without making words. Then the dog lowered his head toward a strip of exposed rail and began walking again. Slower this time, certain in a different way. The old rail spur appeared through the trees like a dark scar under the snow. It ran toward a maintenance property that had not seen regular use in years. Jessica knew the file from the Coldwater map rail. Owned land, not fully decommissioned, still listed for emergency storage and service access. A small structure stood half, hidden beyond a bend, built from weathered wood and dull sheet metal. Its roof sagged beneath snow. One window was boarded. A rusted sign near the door read Track Service, North Spur. Rin reached the door and changed. He did not bark. He did not growl. He placed both front paws against the frozen wood and released a low, trembling whine that went through Jessica more deeply than any alarm. It was not a warning. It was a plea. "Caleb?" Jessica called. No answer. She tried the handle. Frozen. She struck the edge with her shoulder once, twice, then used the compact pry tool from her vest. The old frame resisted with a tired groan before giving way. Cold air rolled out, mixed with the smell of rotted wood, old oil, damp canvas, melted snow, and the faint metallic breath of rail equipment, left too long in the dark. Wren entered first. Jessica's flashlight swept across hanging chains, a cracked workbench, signal lanterns, stacked tool crates, a folded tarp, and a radio so old it looked like it belonged to another century. For one terrible second, she saw no one. Then Wren crossed to the far corner and lowered himself beside a shape partly hidden by shadow. Caleb Rourke sat against the wall beneath a torn canvas sheet, his back braced against old timber, one knee bent, the other leg stretched stiffly across the floor. Snowmelt darkened his jacket. His face was pale in the flashlight beam, the hard lines softened by exhaustion and cold. His breathing was thin, visible in small white threads. One glove was missing. His bare fingers were tucked under his arm for warmth, but his other hand held a waterproof pouch so tightly that even weakness had not convinced him to let go. Jessica dropped beside him. "Caleb, stay with me." His eyelids moved. Wren pressed against his side, laying the warmth of his body along Caleb's ribs and shoulder. The dog placed his head near Caleb's hand, not licking, not fussing, simply anchoring him to the world. Jessica pulled the emergency blanket from her pack and wrapped it around Caleb's shoulders. She checked his breathing, his awareness, the cold stiffness in his hands. She did not let herself stare too long at the places where his coat was torn. She focused on what could be done: warmth, pressure, airway, radio, beacon, voice. "Word to support?" she said into the radio. "I found him. North Spur Maintenance Shed, about 0.7 miles from the yard. He is alive. Send medical now," Static hissed. Then Maya's voice broke through, emotional but controlled. "Copy. We have your beacon." Medical moving. Caleb's eyes opened just enough to find Wren first. A faint, almost impossible smile touched his mouth. "Wren." His voice was barely more than air. "Found it." Jessica leaned closer. "Do not talk." His fingers tightened around the pouch. "Root." He swallowed with effort, eyes sharpening for one brief moment. "Was leaked?" Jessica went still. Outside, the wind pushed snow against the walls like sand across a chapel door. Inside, Wren remained pressed to Caleb, a living promise in sable fur. Jessica looked down at the waterproof pouch, then back toward the dark window. The ambush had not been luck. Someone had sold them into that yard. When the rescue team finally reached the shed, their headlamps moved through the snow, like small stars returning to Earth. The medic, Jonah Briggs, came in first. A compact man in his early 40s with brown skin, a shaved head, and kind, tired eyes that had seen enough winter emergencies to know when silence mattered. He spoke gently, worked quickly, and gave Jessica a nod that said Caleb still had a road ahead of him. They carried Caleb out on a stretcher through the falling snow. Wren walked beside it, shoulder nearly touching the frame, refusing to be pulled away until Jessica placed a hand on his neck. "It's all right," she whispered, though she was not sure which one of them needed to hear it. In Jessica's hand was the waterproof pouch Caleb had guarded through cold, pain, and darkness. Inside were the storage device and folded freight pages that could tie North Star, the false identities, and bright pine tools into one chain. Caleb was alive. The evidence had survived. But as Jessica looked back toward the buried tracks of Coldwater Junction, she understood the case had changed. The danger was not only out there in the container yards and winter roads. Some part of the darkness had been standing inside the system with a warm cup of coffee and a friendly smile. By the third morning, the snow over Harbor Lark had changed from a gentle veil into something more stubborn. It clung to windshields, gathered along the shoulders of the highway, and turned the pine woods north of town into a long white corridor that seemed to lead toward some old secret. Jessica Ward rode in the passenger seat of the unmarked SUV. one hand resting near Rin's lead, the other holding the copied freight paper from container HL 7721. The words Coldwater Junction had not left her mind. They sat there like a cold coin under the tongue. Rin lay in the back, his sable coat dark against the gray blanket beneath him, his amber eyes half open but never truly asleep. Every few minutes, his nose twitched toward the heater vents, reading the world through traces Jessica could not even imagine. He was 5 years old, strong and disciplined, but there were moments when he seemed older than any person in the vehicle, as if dogs carried ancient maps inside their bones. Captain Caleb Rourke drove without wasting movement. His gloved hands rested steady on the wheel, his gray eyes fixed on the road ahead. Snow collected along the edges of his short beard, then melted when the heater breathed across the cabin. Caleb was not cold in the way other men were cold. He seemed built from silence, discipline, and old decisions that had never fully left him. Jessica had worked beside loud men, charming men. Men who filled rooms because they were afraid of quiet. Caleb was different. He made quiet feel like a tool. A support team followed nearly a mile behind in 2 separate vehicles. This was not a full raid, only a short reconnaissance run toward a truck stop tied to the freight paper Jessica had found. The place sat outside Harbor Lark near the northern border route, a weather-beaten rest stop called Pine Mercy Station. The name sounded kinder than the building looked. Its roof sagged beneath snow, its windows glowed with weak yellow light, and 3 tractor-trailers sat parked under lamps that flickered like tired stars. Inside the main building, a thin, elderly cashier named Earl Madsen watched them enter. Earl had a narrow frame, watery blue eyes, and a gray mustache that drooped over his upper lip like frostbitten moss. He wore a red flannel shirt under a faded vest, and moved with the careful patience of a man who had spent 40 winters listening to truckers complain about roads, coffee, and weather. He nodded at Jessica's badge, then looked down at Rin with respectful caution. "That dog looks like he knows more than most customers." "He usually does," Jessica said. Rin did not stay near the coffee counter. He turned toward the back door, ears forward, body low with concentration. Jessica followed him through a narrow hallway smelling of burnt coffee, wet wool, and old floor cleaner. Outside, behind the station, the snow was less disturbed. A few trucks had left tire tracks, but one vehicle sat slightly apart from the rest. A silver SUV parked near a dead vending machine, its windows filmed with frost, its license plate dusted white. Caleb came up beside her. "Too clean to be abandoned." Jessica nodded. "Too hidden to be resting." From inside the SUV came a soft electric whir, sudden and thin, like a trapped insect waking in the cold. Rin froze, one paw lifted above the snow, and for a moment the whole morning seemed to hold its breath. Caleb's hand moved near his side, not dramatic, just ready. Jessica signaled the support team. Within minutes, the vehicle was cleared and opened under procedure. The smell hit first: warm plastic gone cold, cheap ink, machine dust, and the sharp artificial sweetness of industrial deodorizer. Rin stepped close, sniffed once, then turned his head toward Jessica, as if the vehicle had just confessed. The back of the SUV had been converted into a traveling identity shop. A compact card printer sat strapped inside a hard case. Beside it were blank plastic cards, a small cutter, a scanner, a laptop, several flash drives, and envelopes of passport-style photographs. There were driver's licenses from Vermont, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Maine. All clean enough to fool someone tired at the end of a long shift. Some cards matched names used on container signatures. Others matched short-term warehouse rentals. A few were tied to online seller accounts flagged in the early financial review. A younger analyst from the support team, Maya Chen, stepped forward with a camera. Maya was 29, petite, sharp-featured, with straight black hair tucked inside a wool cap and brown eyes that moved quickly over evidence. She had the calm intensity of someone who trusted data but still respected what a dog's nose could find. "These are not just driver IDs," she said. "They are building people on paper." Jessica picked up a plastic sleeve and studied the name printed on one card. Then another, then a third. A small frown crossed her face. "Look at this." Caleb leaned closer. "The town name," she said. "West Brindle, Vermont. It should be Brindell, with 2 L's, same mistake on 4 cards from different states." Maya photographed the cards. "Template error." "Or habit," Jessica said. "Simone keeps reusing the same base file." Caleb looked at her then, not with surprise, but with a firmer sort of attention. Jessica felt it and tried not to show that it mattered. At 26, she had learned to work twice before speaking once. Still, there was a private ache in being underestimated so often that even simple recognition felt like warmth. Rin sniffed the printer case and gave a low breath through his nose. Jessica knew that sound. It was the same quiet confirmation he had given beside the container. "Ink, hot plastic. Deodorizer," she said. "Samey family of scent from HL. 7,721. Caleb's jaw tightened slightly. "So the false papers are not separate. They are keeping the freight moving." They reviewed the station cameras from the office behind Earl's counter. Earl apologized for the screen flicker as if he had personally offended federal law. The footage showed the silver SUV arriving near midnight. 20 minutes later, a man in a green winter jacket crossed the lot carrying a small duffel. His face was partly hidden by the hood, but the camera caught him entering a North Star relief supply truck near the fuel pumps. Maya pulled up the employee file. "Name attached to that truck is Owen Lark. North Star marked him inactive 6 months ago." Jessica watched the grainy figure climb into the cab. "Inactive men do not drive trucks through snow at midnight." Caleb glanced toward the window, where Rin stood watching the parked semis beyond the glass. "From now on," he said quietly, "we treat official records as suggestions, not truth." Jessica understood. In this case, paper had become a costume. Names, jobs, signatures, licenses, each one another plastic face. The thought unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. When she was a girl, an older cousin had lost a small family house after forged documents, and a false signature passed through too many careless hands. Jessica still remembered the kitchen table that night, the quiet shame on grown faces, the awful discovery that a piece of paper could harm a life without ever raising its voice. Caleb must have noticed her silence. "You saw the town error fast. I have reasons to look twice at documents." "Good catch," he said. "Only 2 words, no ceremony." But Jessica carried them like a match struck in a cold room. Rin suddenly pushed his nose under the rear seat of the SUV and pawed once at the carpet. Jessica crouched, reached carefully beneath the seat, and pulled out a folded photograph sealed inside a cloudy plastic sleeve. Snowlight washed across it as she opened it. The image showed a long warehouse beside a rail line, with stacked pallets near a loading bay and a sign blurred in the background. Maya sharpened the image on her tablet until 3 words became visible. Bright Pine Tools. Earl, looking over from the doorway, let out a soft breath. "That is over in Ashbel Falls. Graham Voss owns it. Good man. Fixes heaters for older folks when they cannot pay." Jessica stared at the photograph. A container had led to forged identities. Forged identities had led to a trusted store in a town that probably slept well at night. Outside, Rin looked north again, his ears sharp against the falling snow, and Jessica knew the case had just put on a kinder face. Ashbel Falls looked like the kind of town people painted on Christmas tins. Snow rested on the steep roofs of wooden houses. Smoke rose gently from brick chimneys, and warm light spilled from bakery windows onto sidewalks. Swept clean by shopkeepers who still knew one another's names. Elderly couples moved slowly along Main Street in wool coats and knitted scarves, carrying paper bags from the pharmacy, the grocer, and the small cafe where cinnamon steam fogged the glass. Nothing about Ashbel Falls looked dangerous. That, Jessica Ward had learned, was exactly why danger liked places like this. It could hide behind wreaths, church bulletins, and a man who fixed heaters for widows without sending a bill. Bright Pine Tools sat at the edge of town where Main Street gave way to a service road lined with snowbanks and bare maple trees. The store was large but welcoming, built from dark timber and stone, with green shutters, a wide front porch, and a hand-painted sign showing a pine tree wrapped around a wrench. Inside the windows were neat displays of snow shovels, lanterns, space heaters, toolboxes, and sleds for children. A bell rang softly when Jessica stepped through the door with Rin beside her, and Caleb Rourke close behind. The smell inside was sawdust, motor oil, cardboard, coffee, and winter wool. It should have felt harmless. Rin did not think so. The 5-year-old sable German shepherd moved, with measured calm, his black, masked face low, amber eyes steady, ears lifted but not stiff. He did not pull yet. He simply refused to relax. Behind the counter stood Graham Voss. He was about 50, broad through the chest, with blonde hair fading into silver at the temples, and a neatly trimmed beard that made him look like the friendly uncle every town seemed to have. His hands were thick, scarred from years of working with tools, and his blue flannel shirt was rolled at the sleeves, despite the cold. He smiled with practiced warmth, but there was a tiredness beneath it. A thin gray shadow under the eyes that spoke of bills, long winters, and sleep that came late. Graham had the kind of face people trusted because it looked like it had carried firewood, not secrets. "Well now," he said, looking at Rin. "That is a handsome dog. I hope he is here to inspect my manners and not my inventory." Jessica showed her badge. "We need to ask a few questions about recent shipments." Graham's smile held, but one corner of it tightened. "Of course, anything for law enforcement." Caleb said nothing. He had a way of standing still that made other men reveal how much they needed to move. Graham wiped his hands on a shop rag, though they were already clean. A young woman emerged from the aisle carrying a box of furnace filters. Lydia Moss, one of Graham's clerks, looked 22 or 23, with pale skin, round glasses, and curly brown hair pulled into a loose bun that kept escaping its pins. She had the nervous gentleness of someone new to adulthood and already worried about rent. When she saw the badges, she stopped as if the floor had changed under her shoes. "Lydia," Graham said softly, "help Mr. Abernathy load his salt bags out front." She nodded quickly and disappeared, but Jessica noticed her glance toward the rear storage door before leaving. Fear often moved faster than words. Graham led them through the store. "We get shipments from all over during winter. Tools, heaters, emergency kits. Folks around here cannot wait 3 weeks when pipes freeze." "That include North Star Relief Supply?" Jessica asked. "They move goods for half the coast this time of year." Graham chuckled, but it lacked air. "Everett Shaw knows logistics." Rin stopped at the rear storage door, not abruptly like at the port. This time he slowed, nose lifting, then lowered his head toward the gap beneath the door. His breath pressed against the metal threshold. Jessica watched his shoulders tighten. The same dog who could ignore spilled coffee, truck diesel, fish crates, wet boots, and 100 human worries had found something under that door that did not belong in a friendly hardware store. A heater somewhere above them clicked off, and the sudden silence dropped hard. In that small pause, Jessica heard a faint scrape from behind the storage room wall. Wood against concrete. Then stillness, as if the building itself had tried to hide its own heartbeat. Caleb's eyes shifted to Jessica. "Storage room." Graham's voice came too quickly. "Inventory overflow. Nothing interesting unless you like counting snow shovels." Jessica looked at him. "We do not mind counting." The rear room was larger than it appeared from the store floor. Shelves rose high with boxed appliances, tool cases, electric heaters, coils of wire, and cartons labeled as winter blankets. Rin moved through the narrow aisles, not rushing, just following the invisible thread only he could see. Jessica read the room in pieces. A pallet wrapped too tightly. A stack of heaters with mismatched invoice stickers. A row of electric bikes, whose serial plates had been rubbed until the numbers looked faint and tired. Caleb crouched near a track in the dusty concrete. "Hand truck wheels," he said. "Salt and rail grit in the tread." Jessica knelt beside him. The pale crystals were not ordinary sidewalk salt. They were darker, mixed with black flecks from rail beds near the coast. She remembered the photograph from the silver SUV. A warehouse near a rail line, bright pine tools. One piece had touched another. Rin stopped beside a steel door at the back of the room. The handle had fresh scratches around the lock. Jessica felt Graham watching them now, the warmth draining from his face. "What is downstairs?" she asked. "Old storage," he said. Canned paint, broken fixtures, nothing worth your time. Caleb looked at the door. Then it will not take long. The basement air was colder, damp, and close, with a smell that made Rin's ears flatten slightly. Industrial deodorizer layered over ink, plastic, machine oil, wet cardboard, and metal chilled by winter travel. The beam of Jessica's flashlight swept over covered pallets. Some were labeled heating supplies. Others read winter blankets. But beneath the tarps were boxed electronics. High-end power tools, appliance parts, imitation warranty labels, and products with brand markings just a shade too polished to be real. Jessica lifted a small tool casing from an open box and turned it toward her light. The serial number had been shaved down and restamped. Nearby, Caleb uncovered a stack of compact heaters that matched a regional rail theft bulletin from 2 weeks earlier. There are 2 streams here, Jessica said quietly. Counterfeit goods from the port, real goods taken from freight lines. And both sold under clean invoices, Caleb added. Graham stood at the foot of the stairs, his face pale now, his friendly beard and flannel suddenly unable to protect him. I thought some of it was liquidation stock. Jessica turned to him. At first, he looked away. That silence answered more than denial would have. Graham Voss had not begun as a monster in his own mind. Men like him rarely did. He had begun with a failing store, unpaid loans, employees depending on him, and a polished man like Everett Shaw offering goods at prices that felt like mercy. Then mercy became habit. Habit became knowing. Knowing became silence. Rin pawed beneath a pallet and pulled free a black leather glove. Jessica bagged it carefully. Even through the evidence pouch, the smell reached Rin. He turned his head once toward the glove, then toward the basement door. The same deodorizer, the same ink, the same winter road grime from the SUV identity shop. Later, outside, under a darkening sky, Jessica stood near the SUV while the support team documented the basement. Snow began falling harder, softening the edges of Ashbel Falls until the town looked innocent again. Caleb stood beside her, hands in his coat pockets, watching Rin sniff the tire tracks near the loading bay. "Why the FBI?" he asked. Jessica kept her eyes on the snow. For a moment she almost gave him the simple answer, the one people expected about justice and service. Instead she chose the truer one. "When I was younger, someone in my family lost a house because of forged papers. One false signature. A few people too busy to look twice. It taught me that paper is never just paper." Caleb nodded slowly. "A document can be a door, or a lock," Jessica said. He glanced at her, and the hard military line of his face softened just enough to show he understood. "You looked twice today." She did not answer. But the words warmed her more than the heater in the SUV. Maya Chen called from the doorway with an update. A North Star truck was scheduled to leave Bright Pine Tools at midnight, destination listed only as a maintenance transfer toward Coldwater Junction. The route matched the freight paper from Harbor Lark. A support team would follow at distance. Jessica, Rin, and Caleb would conduct the near reconnaissance, confirm the handoff point, and wait for authorization before moving in. Before they climbed into the vehicle, Rin turned away from the truck and faced the black pine woods behind the store. His body went still. A thin sound left his throat, not a growl, not fear, but something lower and sadder, like a warning given to people who had not yet learned the language. Jessica looked through the windshield as the North Star truck rolled out of Ashbel Falls, its red taillights fading into the snow. She touched Rin's head once, feeling the tension beneath his fur. The dog had sensed a trap before any human had found the shape of it. The North Star truck moved through the winter dark like a red-eyed animal that knew it was being followed. Its taillights glowed ahead of Jessica Ward's unmarked SUV, dull and blurred through the falling snow, then vanished for a breath whenever the road curved between walls of black pine. The clock on the dashboard showed 12:17 a.m. by then. Ashbel Falls was behind them, along with its warm calf windows, swept sidewalks, and the kind of small-town innocence that looked almost holy from a distance. Out here, the land had no use for comfort. Snow crossed the road in white sheets, and the forest pressed close, heavy with silence. Rin sat upright in the back seat, no longer resting. The 5-year, old sable German shepherd, held his body rigid. His dark muzzle pointed toward the cracked window where Caleb Rourke had lowered the glass, just enough for him to read the air. Rin's amber eyes did not leave the truck ahead. His ears shifted with every gust, every faint engine note, every whisper of tires over packed snow. Jessica could feel the change in him. It was not fear. Rin had never been a fearful dog. It was warning. The deep animal knowledge that arrived before reason had time to put on its boots. Caleb drove with both hands steady on the wheel. Snow clung to the edges of his short beard, and the green glow from the dash cut hard lines across his face. He had said little since they left Bright Pine Tools, but silence from Caleb never felt empty. It felt measured. His gray eyes moved from the truck to the mirrors, to the roadside, to the weak radio signal blinking on the console. The support team remained behind them at a safe distance. 2 vehicles following through the storm, but Coldwater Junction was known for poor reception. The freight spur cut through a low pocket of forest and old rail land where signals faded even on clear days. Jessica pressed the radio. Word to support. Approaching Coldwater Junction Access Road. North Star truck still in sight. Visibility low. Confirm copy. Static answered first. Dry and brittle. Then Maya Chen's voice came through, broken by snow and distance. Copy partial we are. 2 minutes. Keep tracking but do not engage. Jessica looked at Caleb. Partial copy. He nodded once. Send location pin again. She did, watching the small signal wheel spin too long before it finally showed sent. Ahead, the North Star truck slowed almost too smoothly, turning onto a service road marked by a leaning sign half buried in snow. Coldwater Junction Rail Storage. Beyond it, old freight containers stood in rows, their steel sides dulled by rust and ice. This place had once served the rail spur during overflow seasons. It was not abandoned exactly, just forgotten by everyone, except people who found value in forgotten places. A maintenance shed crouched near the far line of tracks. A shallow drainage ditch cut behind the container rows. Pines rose on both sides like dark witnesses. The truck wants us in there, Caleb said. Jessica's throat tightened. You think they made us? I think they prepared for someone. A burst of white light flashed across the windshield from the left, sudden and blinding. For one frozen second, every snowflake in the air shone like shattered glass, and Rin released one low sound from deep in his chest before the whole yard went dark again. Caleb reacted before Jessica finished drawing breath. He killed the headlights and guided the SUV behind a row of empty containers. Engine low. Down. Jessica lowered herself instinctively. Rin dropped behind the seat but stayed facing the scent. Outside, the North Star truck rolled deeper into the yard, then stopped. Its lights went off. Another engine started somewhere to their right. Jessica tried the radio again. Support be advised, possible trap. Coldwater Junction. We have additional vehicles. Only static came back. A truck without plates moved across the rear lane and stopped, blocking the way they had entered. Then another set of headlights lit up near the container stacks ahead, not moving closer yet, just shining, waiting. It was not chaos. That made it worse. Whoever arranged this had not needed to know Jessica's exact arrival. They only needed the route, the schedule, and a place where weather would do half their work. Caleb leaned close enough for her to hear him over the wind. Listen carefully. We do not hold this position. We get you and Rin out through the east gap. Support has our last pin. Once you clear the fence line, send emergency beacon and move toward the pines. What about you? His eyes did not soften. That was Caleb's kindness, she realized. He did not offer false comfort when time was thin. I will slow them. No, Jessica. The way he said her name carried command, but not pride. It carried the weight of a man who knew what a choice cost. He reached under the console and pulled free a small signal flare, then pointed toward an old forklift left near a leaning stack of empty containers. That forklift can block the narrow lane. The emergency horn box is on the pole beside it. I can make enough noise to confuse them. You cannot handle all of them alone. I do not need to handle them. I need 3 minutes. A figure moved near the truck ahead, only a shadow in a hooded coat. Then another shape crossed behind a container. Jessica heard metal slide against metal, the old yard answering in groans. Rin pressed his nose against her shoulder, then toward the east gap he knew. The dog knew the path out, and somehow that made Jessica's heart ache. Caleb opened his door just enough for the wind to tear snow into the vehicle. Take Rin and run. He can still find what we came for. For 1 second, Jessica saw not the SEAL captain, not the tactical advisor, not the quiet man who noticed everything. She saw a human being choosing to stand in the cold so someone else could carry the truth forward. It felt unfair. It felt ancient, like every story of guardians at a gate. Then Caleb moved. He slipped into the snow, low and fast, heading for the forklift. Jessica released Rin. Go. They ran. The east gap was barely wide enough between two containers leaning toward each other like old giants. Snow struck Jessica's face and stung her eyes. Rin went first, body low, paws sure on the icy ground. Behind them, the yard erupted into sound. A shrill alarm horn wailed from the old pole. A flare hissed red through the snow. The forklift engine coughed, then roared. Metal scraped as Caleb forced it across the lane. Someone shouted behind the containers. Headlights swung wildly, confused by the alarm and the storm. Jessica heard a crash as an empty rack tipped and scattered steel bars across the passage. Caleb was not trying to win a fight. He was buying time with noise, obstacles, and nerve. Rin reached the fence first. There was a broken section near the drainage ditch, half hidden by snow-heavy brush. He pushed through, then turned back, grabbing Jessica's sleeve in his teeth as if pulling her from a dream. She squeezed through, tearing her coat on the wire. Cold air opened around them. The pines swallowed the sound for a moment. Jessica activated her emergency beacon and tried the radio. Word to support, we are east of the yard. Ambush confirmed. Captain Rourke still inside. Repeat. Captain Rourke still inside. This time, Maya's voice burst through, strained and fading. Beacon received coming in. Hold position if safe. Holding position was impossible. The alarm died behind them. The sudden silence was worse than the noise. Jessica turned back toward the yard. Snow and darkness folded over the containers. The North Star truck was moving again, its lights briefly visible between steel walls before disappearing toward the far rail lane. The plate, less truck reversed, then vanished through another exit. By the time the first support vehicle broke through the access road minutes later, Coldwater Junction had become a ghost yard. Caleb was gone. Not captured, Jessica told herself. Not yet. She would not let the thought finish any darker. The support team spread through the yard, calling his name, checking container rows, tire marks, the forklift, the collapsed rack. Near the fence, Rin suddenly stopped. His muzzle lowered to a strip of torn dark fabric caught on a bent piece of steel. Jessica crouched. The cloth matched Caleb's field jacket. Rin smelled it once, then lifted his head away from the container yard. Not toward the road, not toward the support team, toward the pine woods and the old rail spur beyond the drainage ditch. Jessica's chest tightened as Rin pulled the lead, steady and certain. Caleb had stayed so they could live. Now, in the falling snow, Rin had found the only path that might bring him back. Snow came softly over Harbor Lark, Maine. The kind of snow that did not fall in anger but in silence, laying a thin white veil over the harbor roofs, the steel cranes, and the long rows of containers stacked along the frozen edge of the Atlantic. The sea beyond the port was gray and restless, breathing against the docks with a cold, patient rhythm. Every sound seemed sharper in that weather. The groan of chains, the low warning bell of a backing truck, the scrape of boots over salted concrete. It was the sort of morning when even honest things looked suspicious beneath the pale winter light. FBI agent Jessica Ward stood near the inspection lane, with one gloved hand resting lightly on the leash beside her. She was 26. Young enough that people still sometimes looked past her before they learned better. She had chestnut brown hair tied neatly at the back of her head, a clear face touched pink by the cold and steady hazel eyes that missed very little. Her dark FBI field jacket sat stiff across her shoulders, making her look more official than she felt on certain mornings. Jessica carried responsibility the way some people carried old photographs, carefully, close to the heart, and with a quiet fear of dropping it. Beside her stood Rin, her 5-year, Old German Shepherd K9, a powerful sable-coated dog with dark amber eyes, a black mask along his face, and ears that lifted at the smallest change in the air. Rin was not the loud sort of dog people imagined from television. He did not waste himself on noise. He watched, listened, breathed in the world, and waited until truth gave off a scent. In Jessica's private thoughts, Rin was less like a tool and more like a lantern with paws, always finding the hidden corner first. The morning inspection involved a shipment from North Star Relief Supply, a local company praised across northern Maine for its winter aid convoy. Every December, North Star trucks rolled through small towns with donated blankets, portable heaters, greenhouse supplies, and emergency food kits for elderly residents snowed in along the coast. Its owner, Everett Shaw, had become something of a winter saint in local newspapers. A tall, silver-haired businessman with polished manners and photographs of himself, shaking hands with church volunteers and county officials. People liked men who arrived with warm coats when the wind was cruel. Jessica had learned that people also liked clean stories, sometimes too much. The manifest said the container held greenhouse frames, irrigation parts, and winter heating equipment for community gardens. On paper, everything looked almost painfully ordinary. The customs officer on site, a broad woman named Denise Mallory with copper, red hair tucked under a navy cap, and a face weathered by years of harbor wind, handed Jessica the file with a shrug. Denise was practical, sharp, aide, and not easily impressed. "If this turns out to be pipes and plastic trays," she said, "I expect your dog to apologize to my coffee." Jessica almost smiled. Rin did not. He moved along the line of containers, nose low, tail level, paws leaving soft prints in the snow dusting the concrete. He passed one container, then another. He ignored fish crates, diesel fumes, wet rope, old cardboard, the ordinary perfume of a working port. Then he reached container HL 7721 and stopped. He did not bark. He did not scratch. He simply sat in front of the metal seal, perfectly still, his amber eyes fixed on the lower hinge, as if the steel had whispered his name. A sudden clang rang out from somewhere deep in the container row, sharp as a church bell struck in an empty valley. Snow slid from a crane cable in a white rush. And for one breath, every person on the dock turned toward the sound, except Rin, who never looked away from the seal. Jessica felt the pause settle over her skin. Rin's stillness had weight. She crouched beside him, close enough to see frost gathering along the whiskers near his muzzle. "What do you have, boy?" she whispered. One of the younger port workers, a thin man with a knitted beanie pulled too low over his ears, gave a nervous laugh. "Maybe he smells the crab bait from Dock 3. Denise Mallory glanced at Rin and then at Jessica. The laughter faded quickly. Jessica examined the seal. The number matched the manifest, but the metal looked newer than the latch around it. Not shiny, exactly, but wrong in a small way, like a fresh button sewn onto an old coat. She ran her thumb near the stamped edge without touching the evidence directly. "This seal has been replaced." "That container cleared preliminary scan," Denise said. Though her voice had changed before Jessica could answer, a dark government SUV rolled to a stop near the inspection lane. A man stepped out into the snow without hurry. Captain Caleb Rourke was in his late 30s, tall and broad, shouldered, with close-cut dark hair, gray eyes, and a short beard trimmed with military neatness. There was a controlled quietness about him, the kind formed by years of making decisions in places where hesitation had a price. He wore a plain winter field coat over tactical gear, but he carried himself like the uniform had never fully left him. He was a Navy SEAL captain assigned as a tactical advisor to the joint operation. Not to run the FBI's case, but to help assess whether this route touched strategic cargo lines and cross border risks. Caleb looked first at Jessica, then at Rin, then at the SEAL. "Your dog alerted?" "He stopped," Jessica said. "For Rin, that's louder than barking." Caleb did not smirk. He did not ask if she was sure. He studied the dog for 2 seconds and said, "Open it by procedure." That was the first thing Jessica liked about him, though she kept the thought to herself. The container doors groaned as they swung outward. The first layer was exactly what the paperwork promised. Stacked greenhouse frames, bundled irrigation pipes, boxed heaters, plastic seed trays. Clean, dull, harmless. But Rin stepped forward and angled right. Toward the back corner, Jessica followed. Behind the legitimate goods, the packing changed. The crates were heavier, reinforced, and wrapped too carefully for cheap agricultural supplies. When the first crate was opened, the mood on the dock turned colder than the weather. Inside lay precision molds, machine components, counterfeit warranty labels, blank branded tags, and sealed packets of paperwork with declared values that made no sense beside the actual equipment. It was not a scattered mistake. It was a system wearing a winter coat. Jessica's pulse stayed steady, but something in her chest tightened. The shipment had not merely crossed a border. It had arrived under the name of charity, dressed as help for people who needed warmth. A port coordinator approached, carrying a cardboard tray of coffees. Miles Carver was in his mid-40s, soft around the middle, with sandy hair thinning at the crown, pale skin reddened by the cold, and a friendly smile that seemed permanently prepared for harmless jokes. He knew everyone's schedule, everyone's coffee order, and every shortcut through the port. "Well," he said lightly, "there goes another peaceful morning." He offered Jessica a cup. "Black, right? You were here early last week." Jessica took it with a polite nod, though she did not drink. Rin leaned forward once, sniffed Miles's dark leather gloves, then drew back and turned his head away. No growl, no warning, just refusal. Miles laughed. Tough crowd. Caleb noticed. Jessica noticed Caleb noticing. While the evidence team photographed the crates, Jessica reviewed the manifest again. A small formatting error repeated in the warehouse transfer code, one extra dash placed before the final digits. It was minor enough to hide inside bureaucracy, but repeated mistakes were fingerprints of habit. She marked it in her notebook. Caleb came beside her. "Something wrong?" "Maybe nothing," she said. Maybe the same person touched more than one document. His eyes moved to her notes. Good to keep. It was not praise exactly. From him, it almost felt like a salute. Near the container threshold, half buried beneath slush and cardboard scraps, Jessica spotted a torn piece of freight paper. She used tweezers to lift it. Most of the ink had blurred, but one line remained readable. Coldwater Junction. Rail spur storage. Rin stepped close, smelled the wet paper, and lifted his head toward the north. Beyond the port, the sky had darkened over the pine-covered hills. Snow began falling harder, soft at first, then steady, as if winter itself had decided to cover the road before anyone could follow it. Jessica looked from the paper to Rin, then to the long white line of highway beyond the harbor gates. The case was not sitting inside one container anymore. It was moving through ports, through paperwork, through winter roads and trusted names. And Rin had found the trail before anyone else knew there was one. By morning, Harbor Lark looked as if the whole town had been wrapped in white linen and told to rest. Snow covered the hospital roof, the parked cars, the railings along the harbor road, and the gray Atlantic beyond the windows seemed quieter than before, as if even the sea had lowered its voice for the wounded. Jessica Ward stood outside room 214 with Rin beside her, one hand resting on the German shepherd's sable neck. Rin had not slept much after the rescue. His amber eyes remained watchful, his ears lifting at every rolling cart, every distant footstep, every soft tone from the nurse's station. He understood hospitals in his own way. They smelled of fear, soap, warm blankets, and people trying very hard not to lose what they loved. Caleb Rourke was awake when Jessica entered. He looked paler than he had in the field, with a hospital blanket pulled up to his chest and a clear line of exhaustion carved across his face. Yet even weakened, he still carried the stillness of a captain. His dark hair was flattened slightly from the pillow, his short beard rougher than usual, and his gray eyes opened with the same quiet focus Jessica had seen in the snow. Pain had not made him smaller. It had simply stripped away everything unnecessary. Rin went straight to the side of the bed and placed his head near Caleb's hand. Caleb moved his fingers just enough to touch the fur between Rin's ears. The gesture was small, but it filled the room more completely than any speech. "You found me," Caleb said, voice rough. Jessica tried to smile. He found you. Caleb looked from Rin to her. A captain does not always make it to the end of the road. He paused, breathing carefully. Sometimes his job is to stand long enough for someone else to carry the truth forward. Jessica felt the words settle into her like snow on dark water. She wanted to say that he should not have had to stand alone. She wanted to say that she had heard the alarm in her dreams. Instead, she nodded because Caleb was not asking for comfort. He was handing her the last piece of duty. By noon, Jessica was back inside the temporary command room set up near the Harbor Larkport office. The room smelled of coffee, printer toner, wet coats, and nerves. Maps covered the walls. Freight records lay across folding tables. Maya Chen moved between laptops with tired precision. Her dark hair tucked behind one ear. Her eyes red from too little sleep but bright with purpose. Denise Mallory stood beside the container chart. Arms crossed, copper-red hair escaping her cap in damp strands. She looked angry in the clean, useful way. Honest people get angry when a trusted system is used as a mask. The waterproof pouch Caleb had guarded through the storm did not solve everything by itself. It was not a magic key. It was something better, a hinge. Inside were a small encrypted storage device, folded freight pages, and partial route logs pulled from the North Star truck's cabin system. Jessica and Maya matched those files against the container HL 7721 manifest, the counterfeit molds and warranty labels, the false IDs from the silver SUV, the shaved serial numbers at Bright Pine Tools, the port cameras, Graham Voss's private invoices, and the inspection schedules only a few people could access. Piece by piece, the frozen ledger opened. North Star Relief Supply had used its winter aid convoy as a shield. Legitimate blankets, heaters, seed trays, and emergency kits rode in front. Behind them moved counterfeit goods, machine parts, false labels, stolen freight, and forged documents. The fake IDs created drivers, warehouse renters, online sellers, and receiving agents. Bright Pine Tools and a chain of smaller storage units took in both counterfeit goods and real items taken from rail shipments, then sold them through clean invoices. It was not one crime. It was a choir of lies, each voice covering the next. The printer beside Maya suddenly spat out a single page with a sharp mechanical cry. Rin lifted his head. Jessica picked up the warm paper, and one line of black text seemed to burn through the room. Inspection route forwarded from Carver Terminal, 11:42 p.m. No one spoke for a moment. Jessica saw Miles Carver again in her mind. Sandy hair, easy smile, coffee tray, harmless jokes, leather gloves Rin had refused to accept. He had known the inspection pattern. He had known the port schedules. He had known enough to sell the shape of their movements without ever stepping into the snow with them. Denise's jaw tightened. Miles had access to that terminal. And his gloves carried the same deodorizer trace from the SUV and the Bright Pine basement, Jessica said. Rin caught it before any of us knew what it meant. Maya pulled up the access logs. He opened the route file 14 minutes before the North Star truck left Ashbel Falls. The room seemed colder after that. Betrayal always did that. It entered through a familiar door. They moved quickly. A warrant came through by late afternoon. Harbor Lark deputies, federal agents, port police, rail security, and the K-9 unit converged on Coldwater Junction before the next heavy band of snow could close the roads. This time Jessica did not go in isolated. She led the K-9 approach with Rin at her side. But the exits were blocked. The rail spur was covered. The container lanes were sealed, and the harbor route was watched. The girl people once mistook for someone merely holding a leash now spoke clearly into the radio, placing each team where it needed to be. At the Coldwater warehouse, North Star trucks idled beneath falling snow, their sides painted with the soft blue logo of the Winter Aid Convoy. From a distance, they looked like Mercy on wheels. Up close, Rin knew better. He led Jessica past pallets marked as blankets and heating supplies, then stopped at a rear service door hidden behind stacked crates. Beyond it, Everett Shaw was trying to leave. Shaw was taller in person than Jessica expected. With silver hair combed neatly back, a fine navy overcoat, and the composed face of a man who had spent years being photographed beside good causes. His skin was smooth, his shoes polished despite the slush, and his voice stayed calm even as agents closed in. He carried himself like a benefactor disturbed by rude weather, not a man whose mask had finally cracked. "This is a misunderstanding," Shaw said. "We move goods in hard times, that is all." Ryn barked once, sharp and certain, blocking the narrow exit with his body. Shaw stopped. Jessica stepped into the red and blue wash of emergency lights reflecting off the snow. "Hard times do not turn greed into kindness," she said. "And relief trucks are not coats you can throw over a crime." Graham Voss stood nearby in custody, shoulders sagging, his friendly face emptied by shame. He did not look like a mastermind. He looked like a man who had told himself one small lie too many, until the lie owned the store, the basement. And his name, Miles Carver, was taken at the port within the hour, still wearing the same dark leather gloves. Ryn had been right from the beginning. By nightfall, the evidence filled the warehouse floor. Counterfeit molds, false labels, card printers, plastic IDs, freight records, stolen tools, heater units, rail shipment logs, North Star route data, and Graham's hidden invoices. The case that began with one dog sitting before the wrong container had become a chain no polite speech could break. Weeks later, snow still lay over Harbor Lark, but the sky had softened. Jessica brought Ryn to the rehabilitation center near the coast, where Caleb was learning the slow discipline of healing. He walked with care now, thinner and slower, but upright. The ocean beyond the window was steel gray, and gulls moved like white scraps of paper over the waves. Ryn crossed the room without command and placed his head on Caleb's knee. Caleb rested his hand there, quiet, grateful, alive. Jessica stood beside them, watching the dog and the captain breathe in the same peaceful silence. She was no longer simply the young agent people looked past. She had carried the truth through the storm. In a world where people could counterfeit papers, products, identities, and even kindness, Ryn had reminded them of the one thing no one could forge: loyalty. And sometimes, in the coldest winter, God did not send a miracle that shook the sky. Sometimes he sent a dog who knew the way back. Sometimes the greatest miracles do not arrive with thunder in the sky or a light bright enough to stop the world. Sometimes God sends them quietly, through a loyal dog who refuses to leave a trail, through a wounded man who still protects the truth, or through one young woman who chooses courage when fear would have been easier. This story reminds us that loyalty cannot be bought, forged, or hidden behind false papers. People may pretend to be kind. They may wear clean suits, speak gentle words, and build a bright name in the community. But real kindness is proven in the cold moments when no one is watching, when someone needs help, when an animal is frightened, when a stranger is alone, or when doing the right thing costs us something. Ryn's loyalty teaches us a simple lesson for everyday life. Never ignore the quiet souls beside us. Animals feel more than many people realize. They notice sadness, fear, danger, and love in ways we may never fully understand. A dog does not care about titles, money, or reputation. A dog knows the heart by what it gives, not by what it claims. So may we treat animals with gentleness, patience, and respect, because sometimes they are not just companions. Sometimes they are God's soft messengers, leading us back to compassion. And may we remember this in our own homes, our neighborhoods, and our daily choices. Check on the lonely neighbor. Speak kindly to the tired cashier. Help the older person carrying something heavy. Feed the stray animal if you can. Defend what is right, even when it feels inconvenient. Small acts of mercy may look ordinary to us, but in someone else's life, they may become a miracle. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs a little hope today. Leave a comment and tell us where you are watching from, or tell us about an animal who changed your life. And if you believe stories of faith, loyalty, courage, and healing still matter, please subscribe and stay with this channel for more heartfelt journeys. May God bless you, protect your family, bring peace into your home, guide your steps through every difficult season, and remind you that even in the coldest winter, His light can still find a way back.